Hi folks, I'm Tim. Welcome to the Restoration Couple. In today's video, we're going to be moving on in our shaker door making series onto method 2, which is the loose tenon shaker door. So stick around and I'll show you how we get on. So it's full on production at the moment. This is like a mini series we're doing. If you haven't checked out the first few episodes, then I will link to them all down in the description and there'll be a playlist. We're looking at shaker doors. This is the first time I've made them, but I wanted to try 4 different techniques to play around both for myself and to just show people the options out there. So our first episode, we looked at making a traditional shaker door. These are due to be stained and they have a tenon in a groove with a solid wooden panel. Also behind me you can see I've done some larger versions which are going to be painted, and therefore I've used a 6mm moisture resistant MDF. Now a little bit on the basics, you can see that we are using this cutter here. Now this is a groove cutter in that it's only got one cutting blade. The idea being that as you pass the timber through, it will cut you that 6mm slot, which is a 1/4 inch in old money. So before we get too carried away, I'm just going to go through and almost make up our sections. So I'm going to select the good faces and we'll make a mark on all those. To be quite honest, with this size I should have just gone with a solid board, but I was in the shaker spirit, so I'm kind of just going with it. Yeah, so that's the short and thin. You can see already that I should really have just used, what are these? These are the 65. I probably, for this little kitchen with these little cupboard doors, I should have gone for a 50mm or 2-inch frame, but I've already done it now, and the only thing I could do is leave the stiles the same width and just slim down these. Right, I just slimmed down these two, and I think that looks fine. So I'm actually going to do that rather than have everything a little bit mismatched. I'm actually going to do that same thing, reduce the rails down to 50mm on all of them. Right, finally a point to make a start. All of our numbers are facing up, so we're always going to have the top of the door facing up, and all I'm going to do now is just put a line pointing towards the side. I'm going to need to raise this a little bit. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty close there, so we'll leave it at that. So we actually need to groove the ends of these as well. Completely forgot about that. Should have done that first. This technique we're going to be using a loose tenon in there, but then the groove is still on the inside. So far so good. These ones, like I said, we're going for a loose tenon method today. So the rails also need to have a groove on the end of them. And it makes sense to do the end grain first, I think, so any tear out is then cleaned up on the other side. I've got all 12 doors or so made up that way. So it's a bit of an odd shaped narrow door and it's going to need a good deal of sanding, but you can see our rail here is slightly different from the last time round, and we don't have a tenon on the end like this one here, which is how we did the last type. Now those would ordinarily slot in, give you your frame, and the panel would sit in the groove all the way around. Slightly different this time, which means there's just grooves, so we've actually put a groove on the end of the rails as well as on the inside. So I've done a quick layout of everything, make sure I've got all my components. So now we need to cut the little panels to sit inside these miniature little doors. We want to find out the width of our panels. So to start with, we're just going to make sure everything's tight, and I'm just measuring for the outside of that groove to the outside of that groove, which is 230mm, made a note of that. And then to measure the other side, you can of course just measure the height of your style and take away the depth of the two grooves, or if you want to just do it in person, by eye, you can just remove one piece and measure groove to groove, and I can see that's 60mm. So I've written that down. Now we're ready to cut our panels. Because in the last video we spent all that time resawing down some timber to create a solid wood insert. Now that's great because it matches the frame, and in that instance we are actually going to stain them. These ones are going to be painted, so that's the reason why a man-made sheet material like this moisture resistant MDF is a good way to go, and that's a way that a lot of these doors are made commercially for kind of doors for kitchens and bathrooms. And I guess there's also the option, if you were to use oak or ash or something for the frame, you could just pick up some ash or oak veneered plywood or MDF, and that's a way that you can get a wide expanse of timber at such a thin width, because you're not going to be able to joint 6mm oak on an 800mm cabinet. Now I'll cut the last ones on the track saw because they're all quite regular. There's so many little cuts on these. I'm just going to use the bandsaw just because this fence is really easy to read and it's nice and precise and quick to change. But of course all of this could be done by a jigsaw or a handsaw or a circular saw, because at the end of the day the edges of it are actually hidden well within the reveals, so you've got a little bit of a tolerance there. Now I've made these all pretty much edge to edge, maybe a blade's width less, whereas I did leave a little bit more wiggle room when I was using the solid wood. But I just want to make sure they're not too big, because that will stop our pieces from sitting next to each other. So there we go. Our little dry fit of everything, and we've got all the panels at least fitting now. What we need to do now is cut our tenons. Because these are loose tenons, they aren't doing the same as what we did in yesterday's video. They haven't got the tenon inbuilt into the rail, so we're just going to cut some strips of the same material, so in this case MDF. We're going to cut them at 26mm, and that 26mm measurement is taken from the width of both of those grooves added together. They should be standard. We'll cut 4 per panel, and they'll just slot in the end of each, and everything will get glued up. So all being well, we want this to go in without pushing these two bits apart. So it needs to be snug fit, but let's just make sure. No, I'm pushing those tight together. You can still see that this is a little bit wide. So let's go. Yeah, that's going to clamp up nice. We don't want it to have any gaps at the end, although we are painting. If we can do away with any filling, that'd be great. they're actually fine. You can see they're in there and they're a little bit proud, which is fine. I think there is a tiny gap there, but I'm not sure. Maybe these will swell a little bit with the glue. I don't really want to make it too snug, otherwise these might not come up tight. It's going to be all clamps on deck. I'm even pulling out the old supermarket special because we'll ideally want to get all of these clamps up at once. Right, that was handy. Will's been here. He's helping me out one day a week, just doing odd bits around the garden and prepping up some bits for me. So it's good to get that little production line gone. The main thing with it's just a bit more fiddly, I'm finding, this loose tenon bit, because there's a bit more to brush on with the glue and more components to work with. But still, everything's gluing up nicely. Just found this last little one, so let's do that, and then that should be it. Fortunately, this is the last one because I am fresh out of clamps. Whereas yesterday, I didn't put much glue at all on the panel because it was a loose-ish panel, in that it was solid wood. At least this is MDF, so we can glue things up a little bit more. So there are quite a few other videos out there of this method, the loose tenon method, but they've used 18mm MDF for the rails and stiles. So nothing wrong with that, but if you wanted to use solid wood, then you would need to think about how you're going to make these look right. Would you try and match the grain somehow and use the same timber, or perhaps make a feature of those? So if you had a pale wood like this poplar, you could actually do those in a much darker walnut or mahogany or something, you know, to make them stand out like a little key. Right, that is the last one. I officially can't make more than 8 little doors at a time because I just don't have clamps. That said, it took me about 5 years to get around to buying any decent-ish long clamps. And if anyone does need clamps for doing this sort of glue up or cupboard doors or even full width doors, these Bessie clamps, they're not like the crazy expensive ones. They are, what are they called? Uni clamps, and I think these were £12 each, which sometimes sounds quite a lot, but they're pretty solid and they go right up to 600mm. And compared to their really big chunky premium range, they're about a quarter of the price. Go all sanded now, and that is our method number 2 for the loose tenon shaker door. As I mentioned earlier, these are all paint grade, so they're all going to be painted, so it doesn't matter that we've used the MDF both for the panel and for this. But if you did want to make these in a stained solid wood effect, then yes, you're going to have to look at cutting these from either the same timber or a contrasting timber. So I'm going to hold out until the end of the week until I give my final verdict, because I've got another 2 different build methods to go. But this way worked pretty well. I've just gone out to the camper van and done a little dry fit to make sure these were all okay before I do the final prep and paint. I went 4 or 5 mil under. That was probably a little bit more than needed, but that just means we're going to have to hang them really nicely to get that perfect shadow gap all the way around, being that these are going into a face frame. And there's no real reason why you can't use that same loose tenon method on bigger doors like these that we made yesterday. Anyway, love to hear your thoughts on the loose tenon method, and if you've got any comments, stick them down below. As we move on to tomorrow's version, which I'm just about to start now, that is going to be a pocket hole shaker door. So a whole different method again, but one that uses less tools and perhaps a little bit easier. So stay tuned for that. If you haven't subscribed, you can do so now. If you enjoyed this video, then do give us a thumbs up. That always helps. But remember, if you can, do it yourself, and we'll see you next time tomorrow for more shenanigans.